I'll make this not too long because I know you've been here for a while, but I'll just share my story really quickly. I grew up LDS from the time I was born. My family actually goes all the way back to the beginning of Mormonism. I think Cole mentioned at the beginning. My great great, you know, I think it's five greats back is grandpa is Hiram Smith, who's Joseph Smith's brother. Um, he died in the same shootout that Joseph Smith died in. He was kind of like his right hand man in a lot of ways, and so that's kind of, and then also like um, Brigham Young, if you guys know BYU, his brother is also my four grades back grandpa. So, um, I have been very rooted in the church with my family history. um, so I grew up in Arizona, in Gilbert, which is an area that is very LDS. It's kind of like a satellite Mormon area from like Provo or like Salt Lake. It's just kind of interesting, if you learn kind of the history of Mormonism and how it came to be. People settled Utah, but then they kind of branched out. So they went up to Idaho and they went down to Arizona, and so my ancestors pretty much were some of the settlers there in Mesa. And then my grandma came from Cuba on the Freedom flights, so I'm a little bit Mormon and a little bit Cuban. But grew up very Mormon. It's just funny because it's like if you go to Utah, you look at people and they all look kind of similar because they're all kind of related. And so it's like almost a nationality at this point. Um, but anyways, so yes, I was born in Arizona and I just grew up LDS for most of my childhood. I was just really taught to be Mormon. I grew up going to Mormon church and would sit in Sunday school. They would teach you all sorts of things like follow the prophet. You want to go to the temple one day. It's a great idea to serve a mission. You definitely like are strongly encouraged to do that. Um, and I learned a lot of like songs, and I'm a worship leader, and I love music, and so that's something that really sticks with me a lot. I've always just kind of really resonated with music, and a lot of the songs that were taught like just like are burned in my brain. But they're not like a good gospel message. Like all the songs, it's like there's there's one that's like what. Okay. There's one that like it just talks about how like, you know, um, I can be with God one day, or most of them do. It's like I'll be with God one day, if I do good enough. And so that's kind of like the whole overarching like message that you get as a kid. It's like, yeah, you can be in heaven with God, but you have to be good enough. And so that was something that was really hard for me from a really young age. I grew up in kind of a broken home. My mom married my dad when she was 18, because that's also something that's very highly encouraged. Um, they want you to get married as soon as you can. Like guys get back from their missions and they will marry like 18-year-old girls and then that's it. And so my parents' marriage didn't work out very well. My dad got addicted to opioids, um and that's something that happens in Utah a lot because it's not a hard drug, and it's not technically against Mormonism. And so it's kind of something that creeps in there. And so they got divorced when I was 3, and my mom remarried my stepdad, and that was hard, just because he kind of had he didn't really know how to be a dad. It was just kind of like, here's a kid, it's like raise this child now. And so he really struggled with being loving and knowing how to like relate to me. And so because of that, my whole entire life, I just never felt loved. I never felt God's love, and I never felt love from my parents. Um, and so it was really challenging. Um, and I just wanted to feel wanted. And so that's kind of and I feel like that's a lot of our stories before we find God. It's like you just want to feel wanted, and loved and accepted. So grew up just learning all that doctrine that Cole so kindly shared with us. I can confirm all of it. um, so when I was 9, I started figure skating lessons, and I ended up becoming like a competitive figure skater. My identity got really rooted in that. And then when I was 14, I broke my ankle, and that ended my skating career. And I wanted to find just like a hobby or something, and I ended up just choosing music, which led me to a Mormon private school. And at this Mormon private school, I was learning the Book of Mormon for 2 hours every single morning and going to Mormon seminary on top of that. And most high school kids go to Mormon seminary. Basically, what that is like you go to high school and then there's a free period. This is how it works in Utah. There'll be a free period, and then you use that free period and you go to the seminary, and it's basically like a church class in the middle of the day, like every day. Here in Washington, they probably don't have that. Usually, it's like early morning class that they'll do. So anyways, so I was doing that, and so it's really funny because now that I'm not Mormon, people always like to say, well, you were never really Mormon, like you never really believed it, because if you did, then you wouldn't be standing where you are right now. And it's funny because I just laughed to myself because I'm like, I was more Mormon than you, my friend. Like I was very zealous for the doctrines of the church, and just for the Book of Mormon. I loved the Book of Mormon. I just had like a passion for God. Like going through, I think, the 2 hours of Book of Mormon every morning and then seminary every morning, I became very passionate about Mormonism. And I think ultimately it was I wanted to know God, and I wanted to be close to him, and so that was the only way that I knew how. So that's kind of what I did. At the time, I was really, really wrestling with this like feeling of not being loved and not being wanted, and also I struggled a lot because like I knew that I was a sinner. I knew that I had sinned many times in many different ways, and I because of the way that Mormonism teaches, I was like, all right, well, I am not going to be able to go to heaven. Like, because I don't measure up, I'm not qualified. Like, if I'm looking at the criteria, it doesn't work. And so, um, I developed kind of like an anxiety. Like, I would just have like these random anxiety attacks that I couldn't even, like there was no real trigger for them. It would just be like snap of a finger, something happens all of a sudden, I'm just like bursting into tears for no reason. Or I also just dealt with a lot of like concealed depression. So, and I think this is like the form of depression that most Mormons deal with, where it's like you have to present well, you have to look good to everyone around you, and that's exactly what I was doing. So nobody knew, my parents didn't know, like nobody knew that I wanted to die, like really bad. I just thought to myself, like, if Cole mentioned it a little bit, but I was like, I am so tormented on earth right now. Like I was hearing voices as well, like things like you don't belong to God and all this stuff, and you're not good enough. You're not going to go to heaven. You're not going to go to celestial kingdom or whatever. Um, and so because of that, I just really, really struggled, and I was just like, I can't even explain just like how dark and like just like hopeless I felt. And but I was just this like happy-go-lucky girl, performing and singing and dancing and doing all this stuff, who had friends and was popular, and but inside I wanted to die. And um but I thought to myself, well, if I kill myself, then I go to hell, so, or outer darkness or whatever. Or yeah, so I thought, well, I guess I just write it out here, like Cole said, like I'll just suffer here, because it seems like suffering here is not as bad as suffering, in hell. So that's kind of what I ended up doing. But at this private school, my teacher, she was a really interesting lady, but she had a lot of answers. Like I never had somebody in my life that I could go to who had answers for these questions that I had when it came to like Mormon doctrine and things like that. But she did. She was like really knowledgeable. She was kind of an alternative thinking Mormon. I feel like she had a couple kids that had passed away, and that was really hard for her. And I think so she kind of dug deeper into Mormon doctrine and stuff to kind of understand or get some comfort maybe. And so her name was Nancy, and it's actually really funny because she ended up so she ended up leaving the Mormon church, and I ended up leaving with her, and my mom too, because my mom was friends with her. And I was like, so basically she came to my mom and I one day and she's like, I have to confide in you that like I'm not really like I don't think the current LDS church is like on top of it anymore. I think that this guy named Denver Snuffer is an actual prophet, and I think that God's going that way, so I'm gonna go that way. And I just like looked at my mom and I was like, she's right. But I think I just trusted Nancy so much that I was like, okay. So we did, and my mom kind of came to the conclusion. She's like, yeah, there are a lot of inconsistencies within the current LDS church, and it made sense to her as well. So that's what we did. And Nancy ended up moving to Idaho, like kind of like Bonners Ferry area, if anyone's familiar, like Coeur d'Alene over there, buying a property and kind of just hunkering down for the end of the world. So that was actually my first time ever coming to this part of the United States, was to visit her, which is kind of funny. But yeah, so she did that, and I really thought the world was ending. So I was like, I lost all my friends and everything, and everyone thought I was weird once everybody found out that I had left the church. And so I became like a recluse kind of. But what was really cool is during this time, and sometimes I even wonder if the Lord did this so that it would make room in my life for Christians. But during this time, my parents' marriage is a mess. My parents are going to counseling with this Christian pastor because my mom's friend recommended it. And my dad ended up becoming a Christian because the pastor said to my dad, or my stepdad, the pastor said to my stepdad, you have a responsibility to find out what's true for your family. And that really hit him, I guess. It really affected him. And so he really did his research. He really dug in, and he came to the conclusion that Mormonism, there's no way that it's true. And my dad's a very smart guy. He's a lawyer, and he's somebody that people go to for like advice, and like he's a very wise guy. And so I think that when he left the church, it was like really shocking for his family because they're like, wait, but you're so smart, why would you leave the church? But anyway, so he did, and that caused even more problems in my parents' marriage because at first my dad's like, why can't you just be Mormon? And now my mom is like, well, why can't you just be Mormon? And so that was like, that made a really big impact on me and my mom. So me and my mom kind of branched off, and our family became very divided because it was like my mom and I, and then it was my dad, and like my brothers were somewhere in the middle because they were just young. And but what happened was, because of this, like because my dad had this connection with this church and everything, like I ended up going to like a camp one time, and people there poured into me and stuff, like a Christian camp. And honestly, because I left the church and everything, the only people that really were my friends, or that really would be my friends, were Christians, which is actually so interesting. So my mom and I, like in the midst of all of this, we decided to go to different churches because we thought it was fun. And so we would just go around to all these different churches, and I made different friends. There are these two girls, Noah and Maggie, and this is why I think it's so important that Christians share their faith with other people, and why like you should never disqualify yourself from like thinking that you could make a difference, because these girls are just in high school, they're just like normal Christian girls, but like they really were really good friends of mine that I would go over to their house sometimes, and it seemed like they had been like planning like how they were going to talk to me. They're like, all right, we got our Bible verses set out and we're going to go through these with her. And I would show up because I was like, these are my only friends. and um and then they would walk through them with me, and I was super open to talk about it, but I also wasn't really willing to budge yet. And so we would just talk, and I'm sure they probably felt frustrated at times, like hopeless, like, oh, why can't we help this girl? But I think it's something that it's important to keep in mind when you're witnessing to LDS people, is that it's usually not a one conversation sort of deal. And so you have to keep the mentality of I'm putting stones in their shoe. You know, if you guys have heard that analogy before, Tactics, I think, is the one that talks about it. But, you know, dropping little pieces of information that will bother them and continue to bother them because that's what my friends did. And then there was a woman, and her name was Sue Werner, and she was an amazing woman. She still is. She's still with us. um, but she has tons of had like a couple of different doctorates in biblical studies. Had taken she was like a tour guide in Israel. She would do all these trips, and my mom and I were really interested in um, like how Jesus was Jewish and how that relates to us. And my mom was really fascinated by the holy days and things like that. And she had a lot of that information. So my mom and I were like, how can we learn from you? We want you to teach us. and, um, and so we ended up just coming to her house all the time and helping her organize her library and things like that. My mom's a CPA, so she was doing her taxes and stuff. And Sue would just talk to us, and we would have these conversations, and it was just really good. There was one time that we were organizing your library, and there is a book called Kingdom of the Cults. Is anyone familiar with that one? That's a very, very well-known book. My mom yeah, I've heard it's really good. Actually, I haven't read it, but my mom came across it, and she pulls it off the shelf, and she's like, "What's this?" And she's like, "This is really interesting." And she opens it up, and she's like, "Why is Mormonism in here?" And then Sue's like, "Oh, well, because you guys believe that you can become gods." And my mom was like, well, we can become gods. And then that just kind of ended the conversation. But my mom was very stubborn. But anyways, eventually one day we were driving in the car with Sue, and this is, there's many layers to my story. There's just so many different people and things that happened. But I'm really trying to highlight the Christians that impacted me. So we were driving one day in the car. I think we were coming back from a church service thing that we had gone to. And she brought up the book of Abraham, and basically, Cole, you didn't touch on that, right? No. So in the Pearl of Great Price is one of the books in here, and it has the book of Moses, the book of Abraham. Basically, how it came to be was there was a traveling merchant that came across Joseph Smith, and he's like, I have this Egyptian papyrus. And Joseph Smith was like, you're in luck because I know how to translate things. And the guy's like, oh, really? Okay. Well, here, buy my papyrus. And Joseph Smith's like, all right, I'm gonna buy it. And he buys it, and then he translates it. Well, we have this manuscript today. We have this papyrus, and we have Egyptologists today that are very educated, that they know what they're doing. And so these Egyptologists have since gotten a hold of the papyrus, and it turns out that it was no more than just an ancient funeral text, nothing about Moses or Abraham or anything. So Joseph Smith had completely fabricated this, and that was earth-shattering to me. I really thought he was a prophet. This splinter-off cult that I was a part of was a very Mormon fundamentalist group, so everything that Joseph Smith taught was fact for me. I wasn't following any of the prophets after him because I believed that they had gone astray. And so, but to hear that Joseph Smith was a fraud, essentially, was scary because that's my whole identity is wrapped up in this. I've lost my friends. I've lost my religion. I had given up everything for this. I was essentially living like the world was going to end. I forsook so much. I wouldn't I had become so religious. I got to the point I wouldn't really watch any movies. I wouldn't wear makeup. I stopped. I love fashion. I love clothes. I would never buy anything. I became so different. I'd become a completely different person on behalf of this false religion. Finding out that the Native Americans that we have here in America, who the Mormon Church claims are, descendants of Lehi and his family from the Book of Mormon that came from Israel, finding out that there's no DNA evidence to support that. There's no archaeology. Joseph Smith being a Freemason, those things shook me so bad. I cried and cried. I had another panic attack. And my mom was like, "It's fine. We're going to figure it out. We're going to, it's going to be okay. We'll make sense of this." So a few months go by. My mom actually comes to the conclusion that Mormonism was founded on necromancy, which it was, because if Moroni was a real person, then that means he was a dead prophet, which means Joseph Smith spoke to the dead, which means that Mormonism probably isn't true. And that was her thing. When she came to me and told me that, I finally was like, okay. She's like, yeah, so I came to the conclusion Mormonism isn't true. And I was like, oh, I know. And that was like the moment where I was finally able to be really honest with myself, because up until that point I was really holding on, and honestly I was exhausted. I was so tired of making excuses for what I believed, and I just felt peace, and I felt like finally like I could just breathe, and I was like, okay, I can just be honest. And so after that I got plugged in with the church, and um, then I think it's interesting because I say I don't really know exactly when I like was saved, or like had my moment where I was like, I believe, Jesus saved me. I think from that moment I was just like, I'm a Christian now. And I believed in God and I was dedicated to God, but I don't know if I really believed in like his salvation until this one night. um, I was leading worship at the church that I was part of, because I got pretty much thrown onto worship right away. And basically, I just like that day I had just been really like pressing into the Lord, and just like um, listening to worship music, and really just trying to like ready my heart for it. And I I just remember feeling like this freedom that I had never felt in my whole life. Like I finally felt free, and it's the hardest thing to explain, but like my sins, they didn't hold me anymore. Like I knew that Jesus took them from me. I knew that I was no longer like weighed down by it. It was, and like, for my whole life feeling so bogged down by this like heaviness of the Mormon doctrine, and feeling so unworthy, finally like knowing that, yeah, well, I'm a sinner. you know like it no longer has a hold on me. That feeling is something that I like could never even describe to you. Yeah, it was unspeakable, truly, in the best way. So, so yeah, anyways, that's my story. Thank you for listening. And yeah, do you have anything to say?
Um, no, I mean, I just love when Rinsley tells her story, because I think it goes to show that even with, we kind of talk about like, oh, how could someone believe Mormonism for so long? But you can see that it took so much for her worldview to come down, but God was always there,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why all of us we're just one step, we're just one piece of a puzzle that God's putting together, and so I just think it's really awesome. And then I mean, we don't really have anything. If anyone wants to, we're coming around talking about our ministry. And we're both supportive missionaries, and so the way we live is by donations from people, monthly or anything. So if anyone is interested or wants our info on how you would maybe want to help support us in that, you can definitely just come talk to us. But that's all we have for when it comes to informing you guys, especially with the temple coming.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, just to say, don't be discouraged, even if your conversation with someone is small. It can make a big difference.